Really? All right. A democracy cannot exist as a permanent form of government. It can only exist till the majority discovers that it can vote itself large amounts of money from the public treasury. And from then on, the majority votes for the candidate promising them the most benefits. Alexander Fraser Tytler, a 17th century historian. Do all of you know that it's mathematically possible for 28% of this country to vote for a presidential candidate and him to actually win the election? That means 88.6 million people can vote for one person and over 220 million people can vote for the other, and the 88.6 million can get elected. By the time I'm done speaking to all of you today, I'll explain to you guys how this is possible and why the voting system in American politics needs reformation. I've researched this topic for many hours over the last couple weeks, and today I'm here to tell you why the two-party system in American politics is flawed and the Electoral College needs to be abolished. I'm going to start off by telling you the flaws of the Electoral College. Many of you have heard the saying, every vote counts, and I'm going to tell you guys a few examples of why I think that might not actually be the case. Since the year 2000, in Texas and in California, in Texas, a Democrat has lost the election by over 1 million votes every single year, and in California, a Republican has lost by over 1 million votes every single year. This has been since the year 2000. I believe this greatly reduces voter turnout in these states. A direct vote would immediately get rid of this problem and votes would be counted nationally. Every vote would count, and this problem would not exist. I believe it's hard for 19-year-old voters like myself who live in these states. If I'm a Democrat in Texas or a Republican in California, I am one vote. Throughout my entire life, my state has lost by over 1 million votes. A direct vote immediately gets rid of this problem. Another example, since 1968 in North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas, combine the two, and Oklahoma, a Republican has won every single year since 1968. That's 13 elections and 48 years since a Democrat has won those states. Anybody under the age of 48 has never seen a Democrat win. That has to be very discouraging for Democratic voters in those states. There's no way that does not affect the amount of voter turnout. Again, a direct vote immediately gets rid of this issue. Another example, in 2004 in Ohio, George Bush ended up winning the election by a total of 2.8 million votes. He won the election. If 60,000 votes would have switched from George Bush to John Kerry in Ohio, John Kerry would have won the entire election. Why should a small portion of Ohio get to decide who wins the entire presidential race? The Electoral College takes power away from the small states in this country. Did any of you hear about Barack Obama or Mitt Romney campaigning in Montana this year? No, they don't. They go to the states that hold a large number of electoral votes, and they swing back and forth from Republican every year. Those are the only states they care about. Remember earlier when I mentioned that 28% of the country can vote for a presidential candidate and he could actually win the election? To explain this to you, I have to first explain to you in brief detail how the Electoral College works. All right, there are 538 total votes, and each state gets a certain amount of votes. Each state's amount of electoral votes is determined by their 2 senators. Every state has 2 senators, plus the amount of congressional districts every state has. Michigan has 16, where I'm from, Alabama has 9, California has 55. And so that number is their 2 senators plus their amount of congressional districts. So in Michigan there's 16, so there are 2 senators and 14 congressional districts. That's how it works. And in every state but one, in every state but Nebraska, if majority vote happens in that state, every one of their electoral votes goes for that candidate. So let's say California has 50 million people. If 25 million one votes go for one candidate and 24,999,999 go for the other, the person with 25 million and one gets all of California's 55 electoral votes. The 11 largest states happen to add up to 270 electoral votes. And if you take 50.1% of their population, that's all it takes for those 270 votes to go to one candidate, it's only 86.7 million people. That's all it takes to elect a president. However, this is very unlikely simply because this is mathematically possible is the greatest reason of why the Electoral College is flawed and needs to be abolished. The only reason the Electoral College exists in the first place is because in the late 1700s, Alexander Hamilton feared that tyrants could manipulate the unintelligent minds of the American people. Literacy rate was only anywhere from 50 to 60% at this time, and they believed a buffer system needed to be created to separate the American people from who actually voted for the president. They felt a buffer system would separate the unintelligent from the intelligent. That's the only reason it existed. All of these are reasons of why the Electoral College needs to be abolished, and I'm now going to move on the reasons why the two-party system is flawed. Every single one of you on my questionnaire agree that there are more than two sides to every issue. Of all things, why should the presidential race and politics be confided to two sides? We need a legislator that can represent the diversity of the American people. And this includes more than two agendas. So many times, important issues get left out of the political race because they don't fit into either party's platforms. An example of important issues that were left out in 2012, this November, issues that Barack Obama and Mitt Romney both agreed on. They both supported. So if you disagree with this, you have no choice. They both supported the 2008 bailout of banks on Wall Street. They both supported that the U.S. should build a physical barrier between U.S. and Mexico. They both supported military force on the country of Iran if they don't get rid of their nuclear program. Things that weren't even mentioned. Should K-12 teachers get tenure? Should nonviolent drug users be jailed? Should undocumented immigrants be allowed social services such as Medicare and public education? If any of these are very important to you, or if you disagree with something that the two presidential candidates supported, this creates a voting problem for you. It creates voting problems like a lesser of two evils voting strategy. 46% of Americans actually admitted to voting this way in this past election through a Rasmussen telephone survey. 46% of our country voted for the presidential candidate of their choice simply because they did not like the other candidate. This shows there is definitely a choice issue in our presidential race. It also creates an us versus them voting strategy in Congress. Simply because Republicans support an idea in Congress does not mean Democrats should immediately reject it. This causes people in Congress, in the Senate, and the House to vote along party lines. Republicans vote for the Republican bills simply because they do not want to ruffle feathers throughout their party. Politicians doing this are doing our country a disservice. We elect them because we think they are intelligent enough to make their own decisions, to make the right choices for their country, and not vote with their political party. Hopefully, for all of you today, I've been able to shed some light on a very important topic. And maybe for some of you, I've even changed your mind on why we need reformation with the voting system and the two-party system. I've explained to you in deep detail about how the Electoral College is flawed and how 28% of our country can get a president elected, and how the lesser of two evils voting strategy and an us versus them voting strategy are dangerous ways to elect presidents. And today I'm going to leave you with a very wise man's words to sum up all of this. Let us not choose the Democratic answer or the Republican answer, but the right answer. Let us not seek to fix blame from the past, but let's accept our responsibility for the future. John F. Kennedy. Thank you. How long was that?
8:27. Is this PowerPoint for